Welcome to Studio 58A Live here at the Jamaica Information Service, our discussion program coming to you live on Facebook. I'm your host, Vaughn Davis. Thank you to everyone joining us wherever you are. Thank you very much for your eyes. We really do appreciate it. And as you watch, remember to send in your questions and your comments so we can put them to our guest. And like how we have your attention, do us a favor, no man. Share this video with a friend or two or 5,000 so we can have a very lively discussion. Now, what happens when somebody dies and doesn't leave a will or some other document outlining what should happen to their property? That one question opens the door to a whole host of issues that have in many cases ended with violent altercations and families destroyed. Boy, it sounds real dramatic when I say it like that, don't it? But it's actually true. Dead left stories in Jamaica where end up badly are a dime a dozen. That said, there is an agency whose role is to ensure matters like these are amicably resolved and the interests of all parties respected. That agency is the Administrator General's Department. And here with us today is Mrs. Stacy Ann Carty, Deputy Administrator General, to discuss the roles and functions of her department and offer guidance on planning your estate. Welcome, Ms. Carty. Thank you for joining the program today.
Thank you very much, Vaughn, for inviting me and the Administrator General's Department.
All right, so this is the kind of interview I enjoy having because although I know a little, I don't know a whole lot about the Administrator General's Department. So we're both, me and the audience are going to learn a whole heap of things today. All right, so be prepared for a whole heap of questions. Question number one, just give us an outline of what exactly the role and function of the AGD's office is.
Okay, sure. So the Administrator General's Department is created by way of legislation, and our role is to administer trusts and estates where persons have died without a will and they have a minor beneficiary. So that is whomever is to benefit from the estate is under the age of 18. Also, if somebody has made a will and the person has not taken out the grant of administration, so the person who is left in charge, the executor, has not gone to the court to get the grant, we can also administer that estate. Or where the executor has determined that they're not going to go forward and they have done what we call renounced.
All right, so I guess the question I have is when exactly does the Administrator General's Department step in? Is it that you guys go out and look for the situation, or do people generally have to call you in when a situation like this arises?
Right. So for instance, if someone were to die and they have a variety of beneficiaries, they could have a spouse, 4 children, one of them happened to be under the age of 18, what would happen is someone would report it to us. It can be one of those same beneficiaries, or it can be another relative, an employer. Anyone can report it to us. And what they would do, they would complete what we call a form of particulars. It details the person's pretty much entire life story, what they died from, where they lived, what assets they had, if they had some bank accounts, some property, some insurance policies, where they worked, because remember you have NHT refunds that have to be applied for. You could have unpaid salaries, gratuity, whatever it is. So it details all the assets that the person may have, and then we would go about investigating it. We also have to have proof that they're dead, because our job doesn't really start until someone has died. So usually, dependent on how quickly the person comes to us, it may be a burial order as a first notification of death, or it could be the death certificate.
All right. So, well, I love my audience. We're already getting some questions in online.
Before we go on, the FP, that's what we call it, but it's a form of particulars, is easily obtainable. So in this time of COVID, the person doesn't have to visit our office. They can go on our website and they can download the form there as well.
Right. So like I said, I love my audience because they're already starting the questions. Is there a time frame? Candice Christine, thank you, Candice, for your question. She's asking, is there a time frame in which the report of a death has to be made to your department, essentially?
There is no time frame that the law dictates, but we would like to know as quickly as possible. Because remember, some assets are depreciating. So say, for example, there is a motor vehicle. That's a depreciated asset. So you don't want to wait an inordinate time while the asset loses value, because that's not to the benefit of the persons who the deceased would like to benefit or the law has determined should benefit. So it could also be cattle. It could be a variety of things. So we want to know as quickly as possible so that we can move post haste to gather all the assets and move forward with the administration.
All right. So, well, you know what? Let me just go with the questions and then I'll get back to where I'm starting. Quincy Brown, because I like to just address the questions as soon as they come in. Quincy Brown, thank you, Quincy, for your question. He's asking, can I combine my wealth in Jamaica, Cayman, and in the USA into one will?
You could do that. It poses some challenges or a longer administration process because you'd have to get the grant in one jurisdiction and then resealing another. And what would happen is that the law of that governs is a law where the asset is present. So for instance, the Cayman law wouldn't apply to a piece of property in Jamaica, for instance, nor would the law in Jamaica apply to the land that you have in the UK. But what I would suggest to Quincy, it's a very good question, and I love the fact that Quincy has assets across 3 jurisdictions, is that you should seek the services of an attorney at law who will guide you based on your specific situation, what is best for you, but definitely you should make a will governing all your assets globally.
So it sounds like the best place to start is always to have some record of what you want to happen to your assets before you pass on, so that there's no doubt or any kind of conflict or confusion about what you want to do with your assets and so on.
Well, what will happen? There are 2 situations. So what you have stated is make the will. That's perfect estate planning. The will also serves as a good inventory, because what we do, we have an entire division, the inquiry branch, that does just that, inquire into what your assets could have been, because you have died without a will, and so you're intestate. And so we have to write to the banks, the insurance companies, the various persons to try and find out what you own, because Jamaicans tend to be very secretive with their business. For
That's
whatever
true.
reason, my business is my business. You don't need to know what I have. And so we spend quite a bit of time at the investigative stage. So it would be good if we could get all of Jamaica to start making wills. It would be a shorter process of investigation as well. But if you don't make a will, we have legislation, the Intestate Estates and Property Charges Act, that details who is going to get your asset. So
All right,
if
well, we're going to get into that in just a moment, but it's just funny that you mentioned that people not being said that Jamaicans are very secretive and don't like to write with and so on. One of the first comments we got from Anne-Marie Shields is that she's leaving nothing behind and enjoying what she has now. Right. And so the question I have, which just really connects to the things that you just mentioned, is that you leave a will, or you don't leave a will rather. And as far as we know, you may not necessarily have any heirs or any persons, beneficiaries, that kind of thing. What happens to your estate? You know what I mean? Who does it go to? What effort is made to pass it on to somebody, or is it just like the state just co-opts it?
That's an excellent question. I was chuckling at Anne-Marie, living her life like it's golden. The truth is that you're
Exactly.
likely to leave something behind, whether it is, if it is that if I were to die, say the 21st, today's the 21st, and I haven't yet gotten paid, those are unpaid salaries that
Right.
that fall to my estate. Also, if we think about if we're paying NHT likely has 7 years, I believe, of contributions at each given time, if you've been working that long, that are eligible for refunds. So if Anne-Marie is contributing to the NHT and she's working, at this point in time, there are assets that she hasn't accessed, but still fall to her estate were that to happen. Now, Anne-Marie could also have a very gracious uncle, auntie, cousin who has left something for her that
Exactly.
falls to her estate. It happens. And so we can't plan for every eventuality. And that's why when we're making wills, we have what we call a residuary clause, because we know things happen, things fall to our estate that we did not even think about. So if someone were not to make a will and they have no heirs, now if they died pre the act, the Status of the Children's Act, that's in the 70s, I could understand possibly how that could happen, but no, it is, and before the new Intestate Estates and Property Charges Act, but no, the law goes into your entire generation to try and find somebody who can benefit in the schedule of distribution. Your half cousins, once the person can prove that they're related kids, yeah,
Half of my mother side will live in that lane, facing my mother
yeah.
house, something like that. When
I mean, that's
you
an
really go into that
exaggeration,
kind
but
of
what
detail,
I'm trying to get all of us to understand is that the law is not too concerned about everything going to the crown, which is what the question was. It's really trying to find a relative of the deceased. So yes, you have to prove your relationship. And even if nobody, for some reason, you have absolutely nobody who can prove their relationship to you, someone else can, it will fall to the crown, but you can petition the Governor General to waive the rights of the crown. Somebody can prove that they have an equitable or moral interest in the property. So for instance, if there was, say I am 95, I really have no heirs, but there was a nice little lady who used to come over every day, cook, clean, take care of me, pay my bills, go to the supermarket, that person could petition to the crown. So it's unlikely in this day and age that it would fall to the crown, but and there is, even if it fell to the crown, there are options for you to petition the crown. So I really suggest to Madame Anne-Marie that she should make a will, you know. Yes, enjoy your life in moderation, but also the good thing about estate planning, as we were saying before we went live, is that it's a good tool for generational wealth to pass on that which you have worked hard for to the next generation, so that they start a step ahead of where you started. And so it's really a good tool for us to have our estate plans and pass on wealth through our generations.
All right, Candice Christine has another question, and I want to just go with that. She's asking, what if someone wrote a document not notarized about what they want to happen with their assets? Is it difficult to use such a document?
That's a great question, Candice. So in essence, what you're asking are, what are the legal formalities for a will to be valid? That's in essence what it is. And the good thing is that it's not much. Firstly, a will must be in writing. It must be signed by the person who is making the will, and you must have two persons who witnessed that person's signature. So if it is that, for instance, Candice is making her will now, I hope she notices that I never said that you have to have it notarized. You don't need a JP, you don't need a minister. So all she would have to do is write it, sign it at the end of it, and she would have two people witness. The two people don't even have to be present at the same time, but they must be present while she's signing and witness her signature, right? So I would suggest to Candice that she doesn't use not having a notary as an excuse to not make a will, but that she does it post haste because it's quite simple. What I would also suggest to her is that there's a lovely clause, whilst those are the only legal formalities, there's a lovely clause called a residuary clause. We spoke about it a little bit in passing earlier. What it says is, all the rest and residue of my estate, I leave true, and you write it to whomever. Let me give you an example. Say Candice were to have 5 properties, 10 motor cars, and a shop. She could detail all of that. But as we had said earlier, you never really know all that you have. So you may have forgotten something. Or most people don't look over their will every 2 months. So you could have acquired something else, you know? And so the residuary clause will capture everything that you have forgotten to mention about or never knew about.
Is this like one of those things where people would say, for example, I leave all my earthly possessions to such and such and such, and you know, so is this like a one little sentence or something that encapsulates everything that they known and unknown that they have that they just want to leave to a particular individual or persons or that kind of thing?
Yes, pretty much. And what the technical jargon that we use for it is rest and residue. But in essence, that's what it is saying. But she could detail above, you know, she could make it very clear that she wants to leave the furniture to her son, she wants to leave the house to her daughter, and then anything else, the all and the rest of the residue, they can share it equally. Or she may want to give it to a third party, whomever it is. But always remember to have this, it's like a catch-all clause, for want of a better phrase. And so if you don't have that catch-all though, what happens is that you're in this unique situation where you have a partial intestacy. So the part that you forgot to talk about, the law will determine who gets it under the Intestate Estates and Property Charges Act. But the point of making a will is that you don't want the law to determine who your beneficiaries are. You want to determine it, you know, because the law is very clear. For instance, if I have a child and a husband and I were to die, my mother and my father get nothing. That doesn't sit right with many persons who may be caring for an elderly parent, or your parents have done so much for you that you'd want them to benefit or something of the sort. So the best situation is for you to actually make a will and have that residuary clause.
All right, so a whole heap of questions coming in, Stacey. I hope you're prepared because we got a whole the kind of permutations and situations I'm seeing here. It seems really crazy,
Go
but
ahead, go ahead. We'd
go
love
ahead
to
with it.
address them.
All right, so Patrick Griffiths again. Thank you, Patrick, for your question. He's asking if I have been granted the letter of administration, but the beneficiaries cannot afford surveys and valuation reports. How do I transfer the property to them?
Okay, that's a very specific question. Unfortunately, we don't know the entire story. So I have to give some hypothetical answers.
Right.
Generally, what the process is after you have gotten the grant, which is great, you know, the person is moving forward in the administration process, is that you'd have to do what we call a notice to creditors. Because one thing most people don't forget or don't know, that you don't die and leave the debt behind. That
Right,
follows
right.
you,
It
you
goes
know?
to somebody. It becomes somebody's responsibility.
No, the estate still has to pay the bill.
Oh,
So
well,
the
yeah.
fact that you're, the fact that I'm no longer around, the debt hasn't passed with me, you know. So we do the notice to creditors, and you basically have to pay all the liabilities first, because you can't give until you have paid all the debt. So whether it's a funeral expenses, or if you had a mortgage, or if you had a bill at courts for the bedroom set or whatever it is, you have to pay all those bills. Providing that is done, you will then you do a pay revenue affidavit as well, and you then move to pay all the taxes, because you have to pay taxes on death. So I'm not certain whether or not the taxes have been paid on this, because you have to get a transfer tax certificate that shows that all the debt has been paid. When it comes to the survey, that's not a necessity, dependent on what the will said. I'm not certain. So remember, we're speaking in hypothetical, right? But if it is that 5 people were gifted a parcel of land, you don't necessarily have to do a subdivision legally. There might be other factors on the ground which determine that you want to proceed like that. But if the will is that the person should get the property and get it in equal shares, or it says half for me and half for you, Vaughn, what we would do, we do up the transmission application. What that really is a document that allows the registrar of titles to understand that the owner has died, this person has been appointed administrator, and so they know that person's name on the title as the administrator, and then they transfer the property to the beneficiaries. So in this situation, in theory, you could do your notice to creditors, pay the taxes, get your transfer tax certificate showing that you have paid it, do the transmission, and transfer to the beneficiaries. In theory,
Okay.
I'm not sure what is a specific reason they want to do the subdivision. It could be that it's a big parcel of family land and you have 5 different people at 5 different places, and everybody wants a specific splinter title. But
You get, you understand how this, you
administrator,
understand
I do. But the
okay.
administrator legally, unless there's a specific clause in the will, doesn't necessarily have to do that. They could transfer to all the beneficiaries, and then the beneficiaries go ahead and do their splinter titles.
But as a follow-up, Patrick adds that all taxes have been paid and no expenses of any kind. So I suspect that makes things a great deal easier. But it sounds to me, Patrick, like you might need to make a much more like a one-on-one consultation to get granular
Yes.
with the circumstances of your
Okay.
particular situation, and then see if they can find a way forward. But thank you so much for tuning in. I really appreciate the questions. And if you have more, please share them. This is why we have the platform available. We want you to be able to speak directly to stakeholders in the different MDAs, ministries, departments, and agencies, so you can get the answers you need to all the kind of questions that you want. All right. I want to say a big shout out and a thank you to Quincy Brown, who says, Stacy Ann and Vaughn, most informative. Shared this broadcast to my FB page. Well, thank you so much, Quincy. We really appreciate that. Like I said, this is why we make the platform available. Just let you know, you're here watching Studio 58A. This is the discussion program that comes to you live on the JIS's Facebook page, and we endeavor to put you in touch with primary stakeholders in the different agencies so you can get answers to the questions that you need. All right, Stacy. So our next one, I'm going to bowl our next one down the wicket now. Hopefully you can manage this one. From Vanessa Christocentric Silvera. Vanessa, thank you. She says, what if I live in an informal settlement community and I don't have a title? Will the AGD take possession of my property when I die?
That's a good question, Vanessa. So it's so multifaceted. What we do though, when someone dies as an administrator, I'm assuming you don't have a will, that's why you're posing a question like that. So I would start by saying, Vanessa, we need to make a will, but for the general concept, if somebody dies, the first thing we do is to investigate ownership of the parcel of land. So we can't pass on to your beneficiaries that which we can't confirm is owned by you. So if it is that there is absolutely no title to the property, we may have a little difficulty proving who the owner is. If you mean informal to mean squatter settlement, then we have some other queries that are raised because it wouldn't necessarily belong to the deceased. So I'm trying to understand.
Let me see if I can interject. I know that through the housing agency of Jamaica, there are many persons living on areas of or parcels of land. You wouldn't classify them as squatters legally. They just don't have the titles. They've been occupying those parcels of land for years upon years upon years. And, one could go as far as to say they are, legal landowners, but they just don't have a title in a nutshell.
So is it currently being regularized by the government? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I would imagine, but I mean, maybe they just don't get, let's say, for example, the person dies and they just haven't gotten to that person yet to regularize that individual. I would imagine it creates a certain amount of, issues to resolve the administration of that kind of estate because there is no title, even though the person is a legal landowner, if you follow me.
Yes, I understand the question a little better now. So if it is, we have quite a few estates that fall in this general category. Let me explain a little further. The person could have been in what we call a settlement, that whether through the National Land Agency, the Ministry of Lands, Housing Association, whichever government entity is in the process of regularizing a settlement, and they have not yet issued title, but they have determined who the titles will be issued to. We have some of those estates. So what we would do to confirm ownership, that relevant government agency is the one that confirms the ownership to us so that we would be able to have on file, yes, this person owns it. And what would happen when they're ready to issue the title? We get our grant of administration and our instrument of administration, whichever one it is. And the title is issued to the administrator general as the administrator for that deceased person who lived in that settlement that the government has regularized. So if it is being regularized, there's no issue because we can prove that you own it from a letter or some proof from that government agency, and we just await them issuing it and then pass it to your beneficiaries. So that's not a difficulty. But if it is that there is no move as yet to regularize, we would have a difficulty because we wouldn't have any way to confirm that you are the owner. So that is what we have to do when someone dies. Any administrator has to verify ownership of an asset. So we would need some more clarification, or possibly Vanessa would have to take steps to move to regularizing her settlement.
All right, Vanessa, if I haven't interpreted your question correctly, please feel free to shoot it again, give us a question, give us a comment, leave a comment so that we can get a little bit more clarity, if so, and we can get a proper answer to your question. All right. Going back to Triple R Ricketts, I love her. May have already answered her question. She was saying, in the simplest of terms, please explain to the average Jamaican how they should go about making/creating a will. This is a Jamaican with assets, whatever those are, only in Jamaica, right? So I know you had mentioned in terms of the most basic of wills, but for the sake of repetition,
definitely
one more time.
Definitely, and we really want persons to make wills, so we have no problem reinforcing. So for a will to be valid, it's very simple. It must be in writing. The only exception, Jamaicans tend to be very oral. We like to speak everything. So I would say to you, Vaughn, you say that piece of land down by the ackee tree, but not quite until you reach the mango tree, that's yours. Exactly. Then your brother has the one down past the family plot under the breadfruit tree, but that doesn't suffice. So persons will say, my father told me it was mine, but unless you're a soldier in armed conflict or you're in the Navy at sea, you can't make a will orally. So I just want everybody to understand that.
Let's pick a pin in that. We might have to come back to that in a minute then.
If you don't have to, because the army is so organized that you have to make a will upon entry anyway. So we don't even have to worry about them. They're very organized. So for the rest of us, because remember she said the average, everybody.
Right. But the average could be the public, the policeman, or who might have a similar story. I don't know if they encourage policemen to make wills and that kind of thing. It's kind of morbid if you think about it. But at the same time, it does apply. But yeah,
but the police are different than Vaughn, so thanks for raising that question. So what I said about the oral exception, it's just for the army.
Okay.
It doesn't apply to the police, because remember, warfare is really in the purview of the army, although we
Okay,
could be in an
yeah.
entirely different conversation that we will not about warfare, but definitely
So,
it's
let
been
me just
writing.
step into the soldiers and then just start with basic will, then we can touch on the police and then we
Great,
can take it from there.
great. So it must be in writing. So I think we're very clear on that. It must be signed by the person who is making it. Remind me of her name, please. Triple R.
Triple R Ricketts, yes.
Okay, Miss Triple R. So it must be signed by you, and you must have 2 persons witnessing your signature. So it's really simple. So it must be written, you must sign it, and you must have 2 witnesses. That's really legally all that's required. There are lots of niceties, or lots of things that are nice to have, but legally that's all that has to happen. The witness does not have to doesn't have to be a JP, doesn't have to be a doctor, lawyer, pastor, whatever, superintendent of police, nothing like that. It does have to have 2 witnesses and you must sign it. So legally, that's all that is required.
Right. So now touch on the police. So yeah, because police make up a large part of our society, our population. So what regulations apply to them in particular?
Well, there are no special regulations for any other grouping but the Army. The Wills Act specifically mentions the Army, and it's not everybody in the Army that gets that exemption. Remember, you have to be actually at war.
Right.
I don't recall Jamaica being at war with a country, not with an external party in a long time, or if ever. So right now, everybody, everyone falls
on too often or ever, I would imagine.
Correct.
All right. I want to touch on a question that Quincy Brown asked. He says, perhaps, correct you are, Jamaicans are more secretive with business and money compared to us Caymanians. Perhaps we can continue to learn from each other. Please explain the difference between a will and a lucrative life insurance policy with beneficiaries. Can they be combined?
Okay, that's a good question. So a will speaks about your intentions after death and how you want to distribute your assets. So some people will put in a will that they want to be cremated versus buried, or any other intention. It's really few people are going to go against what you have written in your will as something that you want to happen. So some persons will put funeral programs with songs they want to have sung at their funeral, which funeral parlor, that great level of detail could be there. They want their ashes scattered in the sea, whatever it is. In the will, you could go on to state all the assets that you have and who should get them, right? So the insurance policy, on the other hand, is but one asset. So your will could have the insurance policy, 5 bank accounts, 3 houses, 4 boats, 5 helicopters. You could have a variety of assets in your will and saying who they should go to. When you have a life insurance policy, it is just one asset. The life insurance policy gives you the option to state who the beneficiaries are, as you had indicated, or it could state that you want it to go to your estate. I wouldn't suggest for most people to put estate as a beneficiary on an insurance policy. And the reason for it is really that when you put an estate as a beneficiary, you have to go through the entire process of administration to access the funds. Whereas if you were to name a specific person as your beneficiary, what would happen is that that person, upon providing some specific information and completing the relevant forms, would be able to access the funds. So they would not have to await the entire administration process. So the naming of a beneficiary on an insurance policy is actually an estate planning tool. So give an example, say we had a life insurance policy, some offices offer it as well for their employees. So say I were to name a child or a spouse as the beneficiary. Upon my passing, they would have the relevant forms completed and the disbursement would be made to the spouse and child as named. If it's a child, likely I would have put my spouse as a trustee, right? They can then access the funds immediately. If the child has school fees to be paid, they have the money. If you need to do some very simple everyday things, pay electricity bills, whatever it is, the person has the money. When there's an administration process, our act allows us luckily to get advances for specific purposes before we get the grant. But remember, once a person dies, there's an entire process. For us, it's going to take a minimum of 90 days to 120 days after getting all the information to be able to legally have the grant. So it's a quicker process for your beneficiaries to access funds if you have named the person as a beneficiary under the insurance policy versus just writing a will. But I'll follow up on that point of estate planning tools. So yes, naming the beneficiary on the insurance policy is one. If you have bank accounts, some people do joint accounts so that the person can have access to it upon their passing. I would just caution you to remind you that with most institutions, they have access to it while you're alive as well. So you have to be careful who you allow as a joint holder on your account. You also, if you hold land, you can choose to hold it as joint tenants so that upon your passing, it automatically falls to the joint tenant. So there are some tools that you can use in addition to the will to plan your estate and make the transition easier. Because persons tend to say, oh, I'm not old enough to die. I found it interesting on Sunday. I was speaking with somebody who was just saying her grandaunt is 90 something, but she hasn't signed a will that we have prepared maybe about 3 months ago because she doesn't think she's ready to go as yet. So, it's interesting that that is the viewpoint, but also people who are 18, 19, 20, 30 also figure, I have time. But life doesn't really work on our schedule. You just never know. And so it's good to prepare for what we're sure is going to happen. It's just a matter of when.
Which what you just said about raises an interesting fact. I know that typically we just add a signature, which is all well and good, but let's say a person can't necessarily read and isn't so great at writing, but does have assets. What constitutes a signature according to you guys? Would that be, for example, an X or just any kind of marking or script? You know what I mean? Because I would imagine it does become an issue to verify whether or not this is a valid signature on a will. You know what I mean?
Okay, so it's a great question again. What constitutes a signature is not something that we, the admin gen, determines. It's a matter of law. And yes, you can use a mark. An X can be a mark that has been used for generations, for centuries, as a notifying mark. And that's why it's so important to have two witnesses, because those two witnesses might be called to say and attest, to say, yes, I saw Stacy put that mark there, that is her mark. Because let's not think that just because you have a will, it can never be contested. It can be contested that it's not valid. Also, there is actually legislation called Inheritance Family Provision for Dependents Act, long piece of legislation. But all it really means is that there can be somebody who has not been provided for in your will. And they say, no, this is rubbish. You owe me a duty to provide for me. You have not given me anything, and so the court needs to vary it to let me get something. It could be that there are a list of persons, but in essence, the person is dependent on you. So what we usually suggest to persons as attorneys, when you're making a will, if there's somebody who is in law, should be dependent on you, and you have your
I'm not hearing you. Something, Stacy, you suddenly tipped out. I'm not hearing you. Seems as though she froze. I hope we haven't lost her. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, until we figure that out, we're just going to keep pressing ahead.
Exactly why the person did it.
Oh, okay, Stacy, back. You went out just a minute ago, so we didn't quite hear what you were saying. I can't even say what I heard you say. But you were talking about contesting the will and persons owing somebody a duty, for example, if they find that they've been left out of a will or something like that, which is an interesting topic we'd like to get more into. But go ahead.
Okay, so I'll just recap. My apologies. It seemed as though my internet was unstable for a bit.
Sure, that's fine.
So,
the best of us.
The joys of technology.
Right.
So what I was saying to you is that the Inheritance Family Dependents for Provisions Act provides that someone who the law determines in the category of persons usually dependent on you should be provided for. And so they can make an application to the court to vary your will, right? So what the suggestion is that if you are making a will and someone falls in that category,
so
I'm talking again.
Stacy, unfortunately, I'm not hearing you again. You just went out fast on another moment. Hopefully you're not muted. I don't know what the problem is. But hopefully you'll just come right back like last time. So probably just have to wait this one out.
Are you hearing me? I'm hearing you clearly.
But everyone else, thank you so much for all the questions. Keep them coming. Real informative things I never really quite, thought to answer, which is why I love having this program. You guys ask questions that I never really, you know, in my research and preparing for these interviews that we never quite normally consider, largely because I imagine you have to look at it as how much, based on how much it affects your individual situations. And we're just glad that you're paying attention and you're tuning in and you have your questions and you're asking them. We're just hoping that Stacy comes back in
Are you hearing me
a
now,
moment.
Vaughn?
Hopefully things get sorted out with the internet and we're able to hear her, because it would be a shame if this conversation gets paused at the moment. Things are really going great.
Are you hearing me clearly now, or
It's actually online. It says they're hearing Stacy loud and
oh, so it's
clear.
Vaughn.
And I wonder if the problem is ours. I can see her. Stacy, are you
So
talking?
yes, I
You
am.
are talking, but I'm just not hearing you. I don't quite understand what's going on. They said the audience is saying they can hear her, but we just can't hear her.
Okay, since everyone else can hear me, Vaughn, I sent you a private message, but what I will say is that I will just continue since the audience is able to hear me.
Oh wow! So
And
they're hearing her. It's just me. It seems like I'm the only one not hearing Stacy, which is highly unusual. Just gonna ask our technical people to look into that, see if we can get things sorted out. We might just have to get real creative in how we proceed right about now, Stacy. All right, I'm gonna I'm gonna ask you a question. You can answer it, and then when you're finished, you can signal to me so that we can move on to the next one. All right, let's try that and see how that works. All right, so the next question I have for you is Lisa Congley. Thank you, Lisa, for your question. She's asking, can my husband be one of the witnesses to my written document, which I would imagine is her will or whatever the case may be? So you can go ahead and answer that one now.
All right, thank you very much for that question, Lisa. So the provisions in the law are that, yes, you can have witnesses. Before the amendment in 2015, a beneficiary of a will who witnessed the signature would automatically lose their entire that. Yes, you can have witnesses. Before the amendment in 2015, a beneficiary of a will. Vaughn, I'm hearing myself twice now. Automatically lose their entire that. Yes, you can have witnesses. Before the amendment in 2015, a beneficiary of a will. I'm hearing myself.
Oh, you're hearing a feedback. I was trying to. All right. I'm sorting it out. Yeah, it's okay. Go ahead.
Right. Right. Perfect. No more feedback. So what was the previous rule before the amendment to the law in 2015 is that once you have witnessed, and you are a beneficiary, you automatically lose your entitlement. So we always say to somebody, choose as two witnesses someone who you, in a sense, would not give anything to, so that the gift would not, we call, fail in law. With the amendment, the person can take steps to negative the presumption that the gift should not fail. So yes, he could benefit, but I would strongly suggest to you that there are so many people in the world that you should choose a non-beneficiary as a witness. So if your husband is the one to benefit, don't witness the will. So choose a complete stranger to be your two witnesses and you should be okay. But if it were to happen, there is provision, but it's no longer an automatic failure of gifts. Vaughn, I'm not sure if you're hearing us now.
All right. So hopefully Lisa got the answer that she needed on that one. I have a means to hear you, but it's just that you might hear it back. So I'm going to try and find a way so I can listen to you on the device that I'm monitoring the questions and the comments on, so we can keep the thing going. Because I can hear you just like everybody else on the live. So we're just going to keep, I can hear you. So I want to ask the questions. I want to interact in this way. All right.
Great.
So the next question I have is from Hervin Rodney, who's asking, how does the Aeg deal with, well, actually, I think I skipped a question. I skipped a question from Candice Christian, who said, what if I leave my assets to one person and that person dies? How are my assets handled then?
Okay, Candice, I'm assuming you're meaning the person dies before it is that you die. If so, you're supposed to be reviewing your will on intermittent basis. It's what we call a living document, because it doesn't really take effect until after you die. So if it is, for instance, you would have gifted me something or gifted me everything based on what you're saying, and I were to die before you, you really should make another will. So you should be constantly looking back at your will. Now, if it is that you have gifted something to me and I was alive when you died, but I subsequently died, whatever my provisions are for my estate, those persons would get it. So if I have a will and I had a properly drafted will that had a residuary clause in it, whoever it is that is in the residuary clause would get it. Or if I specifically said, I have a benefit from estate Candice, and when that comes to me, I'm going to give it to Vaughn, then Vaughn would get it. Now, if it is that you have gifted it to me, there are lots of permutations, Candice. So if you have any further clarifications, you can ask. So if it is that you have gifted it to me and I died without a will, then the Intestate Estates and Property Charges Act details who would get it. So if they have a schedule in there, it's in section 4, and it basically sets out who your primary beneficiaries would be, who your secondary beneficiaries would be. And so if I didn't make a will, that would pass in accordance with that act. And as I said earlier, the act is very clear who gets and who doesn't get, and it may not be in line with what you want as a person who has worked and toiled so hard for your assets. So we always suggest that persons make a will detailing who it is they want to benefit from their estate.
All right, so let me go down to the question that I have from Hervin Rodney, who's asking, how does the AG deal with citizens' assets in another country? So let's say a Jamaican citizen dies without a will and leaves assets in another country, including maybe an insurance policy or something like that. Do you intervene in a situation where the person does have properties or things in other countries that other persons can inherit?
All right, so that's a multi-leveled question, but in essence, as we had said earlier, the law of the place where the asset is located is a law that governs the asset, right? However, we have, especially in this world, you have a lot of cross-border estates, and you have estates where you have to collect assets in another jurisdiction. So let me give you a good example. We have a lot of entertainers in our country. It's one of our talents that we export a lot of. So entertainers, for instance, could be collecting royalties from the various publishing houses that you could have one in Europe, you could have one in the US, you could have it in Jamaica, you have them all over. And so, yes, we do collect assets from all these publishing houses for the various estates for entertainers that we would be administering. So there is provision, but there are various procedures. It wouldn't be that we would take out a grant in another jurisdiction to collect like real estate, because there is no way that we can take possession of the real estate. So the persons in that jurisdiction would take out the grant and they would then administer in accordance with the laws of that country. But things like personality, to an extent, yes, we would. Personality meaning non-land. But as I said before, I really do suggest that persons make a will in each jurisdiction that they have.
I'm just gonna go down the wiki, but I'm just gonna focus on trying to make sure we get the questions answered from the persons who have tuned in. All right, so okay. Here they're saying they're hearing us loud and clear. All right, so seems that we have a pause, Stacy, so we're not getting out of the barrage of questions. Hopefully that changes and we get some more in. But I just want to look at, from your perspective, from where you sit as the AGD's department, what are the benefits? Well, just to make an appeal for the sake of public knowledge and public understanding, what are the benefits of making a conscious effort to start planning your estate, even though some of us like to believe we're invincible and we don't die and that kind of thing?
Okay, so usually
I'm hearing you again. Fantastic. All right.
Oh,
I don't know what the
we're back.
technology is like, but okay, I can hear you again. Go ahead.
Great. So usually persons are working hard to accomplish whatever it is that they're accomplishing. For most persons, the acquisition of any asset is something that they have worked hard for, whether it's a motor vehicle, whether it's a piece of property. And so if you have worked hard for something in your life, you would like to have, most persons, some control over what happens to it if it is that you are not around anymore. So whether it is that you want to ensure that your children, if you have children, have the comfort of that asset, or whether it is you want your spouse, your parent, your cousin, your brother, whomever it is, you want to ensure that it passes to who you choose. My apologies.
Sure.
Few people ever want to be told exactly what to do whilst they're alive. And in essence, what is going to happen to you if you fail to make a will is that the law is going to tell you in your death and your beneficiaries who are still alive how it is that everything is going to be apportioned. There is no speaking from the grave but through a will. And if it is that you don't have a will, the law is very clear as to who will get what. Some of the contention and so that you spoke about earlier is oftentimes because persons aren't too in agreement with how it's going to be distributed. I feel as though I should have gotten that, I gave this, and so forth. So sometimes you also can help to dispel some of the acrimony that is left behind when you plan, because some of the feelings are quite understood. If it is, for instance, I am the only child for my parent and we lived together, and I helped that parent out and they lived in my home, but it was in my name alone. But I also have 2 children. The property is now going to go by law, if I don't have a will, to those 2 children. How do you know that those 2 children, if they're adults, are going to take care of your parent? You don't know the relationship that exists there. Also, if the person is a child, we know as the Administrator General will have to step in, and that mother of yours is not a beneficiary, albeit your mother, and we have a duty to make sure that the estate assets are generating a benefit for the beneficiaries. So it couldn't be that your mother would live in there rent-free without anything coming to the children. So it gets quite complicated, as you can imagine, if I now go to your mother to say, yes, your son told you he built this house for you, but his name is on the title, and so the rent is actually $150,000 a month, and we would like to collect on the so and the so and the so. So you can see how it progresses, whereas if you had made a will, you might have decided to give it to all 3 of them, both your mother and the 2 children, or whatever it is. But when you haven't made a will, the law then declares who must get what and how.
Fascinating you mentioned. I want to get into the issue of contesting a will, because you mentioned a while ago that the law is very clear in terms of who gets what. How clear are we talking about here? Because I can just imagine you have some people, for example, you know the familiar situations in Jamaica. Man dies, has, for argument's sake, 6 children with 4 different mothers and so on. And so each one believes their child is entitled to a particular thing. Let's say, for example, the man had a house and a car and a, another property, something like that. And then one of the mothers says, I want the car in particular for my child, because when he was alive, the man said, boy, I'll make sure you get that car because I know you like car. But then another mother, for argument's sake, says she wants that car also. How do you proceed in a situation like that where, I would imagine it's contested and it could easily become acrimonious?
Well, it's contentious, but not necessarily contested. You've delved into the belly of much of what happens on a daily basis. Exactly. But the law has leveled the ground much, and you have stated a few things that the man. My understanding is that you were saying he has multiple females in his lives and multiple children. So the law is very clear. You can only have one spouse. So either the person is going to be your lawful wife, who can produce a marriage certificate. That's a spouse, regardless of how many other women there are around. If you have a spouse by virtue of marriage, no one else can be spouse because you can only have one. That's what the law declares. If it is that there are multiple persons who are alleging that they're baby mothers and they are also spouses, only one person can prove spouseship, and it's actually by way of a court application. We call it a declaration of spouseship. So they have to go to the court.
I'm going to write that down. I didn't know that such a thing existed. Declaration of spouseship.
Declaration of spouseship. So they have to go to the court with their witnesses who can prove to the judge that they are the sole spouse. They will have to prove that they were living with the deceased as man and woman for 5 continuous years before death, and they will have to get some disinterested witnesses who can prove that to the court. So we as the Administrator General Department never says, yes, you are the spouse because we believe your story, you look a little bit more believable. That's not our consideration at all. We don't get into that at all. We just direct all persons to the court, whether you want to go to the parish court or the Supreme Court, completely your determination. And we look at what the court has ordered. So either the marriage certificate or the declaration of spouseship, right?
Right.
If you have multiple children, there was a time when many children, I think they had said 70% of the population did not have a father's name entered on the birth certificate. So it was difficult for children to present a birth certificate and prove that the gentleman is their father. Rarely had the issue proving the mother, but the father would have given some issues. And so we have also a declaration of paternity, which means the mothers have to take the matter to court, just as a spouseship, and prove to the judge that this person is the father of the deceased, and they get a declaration of paternity. In essence, they will show that the relationship of father and child existed before the person died, and they will get their declaration. So I say all of this to say that we are not too interested whether you're a child of a marriage, if you were married, a spouseship by way of marriage, or a spouseship by way of declaration. We just need to have the order from the court or the marriage or birth certificate, and that's all that we're required to do. So also, in the beginning, I said to you that the law doesn't allow for oral gifts. So it doesn't matter if you told somebody this car is yours when I die, or that house down the road is yours. No, the person should have written that as in a will, and then we wouldn't even be in it at all. Right. So now that we are in it, it means the person likely did not leave a will, or there's a will and there's some renunciation or contention or something of the sort. But let's stay in the majority of the situations where there is no will, because that's unfortunately
quite common.
Our reality, and that's why we have an entire government department to deal with areas of intestacy, you know. So if it is known that the person did not leave a will, and we have one declared spouse, and we have, let's say, 15 children by way of the declaration or otherwise, and there are no debts. So remember, we spoke earlier about we have to pay all the debts. So we're now in a solvent estate. The law says that the spouse gets the personal chattel, and the motor vehicles are personal chattels. So we would transfer the motor vehicle to the spouse. So once the spouse is proven and there are no debts, the spouse gets that. Remember I said earlier, you know, the law is very clear on who gets what. And so this is one of the areas where it says spouse gets the chattel, so we can transfer the vehicle. The Administrator General would do so. So we endorse the title and we write to the tax office, and that is done. As it relates to all the other properties, we have the option dependent on the age of the child, where the properties are located, the state of the properties, and so forth. A couple of considerations to use our discretion to determine whether we're going to sell the property, rent the property, transfer the property to the beneficiaries. So there are lots of considerations. We can't give you a blanket as to what could be done, but those are the options that we could rent the property, get income, because remember, income is important for beneficiaries. So if it's a young child, say 5, 10, they have continuous expenses. And we also give advances to beneficiaries. So we have beneficiaries who get monthly payments. We have beneficiaries who get installment payments, or they only make a request for a specific payment. So they would prefer to leave their funds here until they're 18, and then they just make a request for a one-off payment or a university school fee, or there are various things. But I say that to say that administration is a process. So even after we've gotten the grant, we're in charge of the estate until the last minor attains 18.
Okay.
So you can imagine that there could be an estate that we could have for 18, 19 years, because the lady could have died in childbirth, the gentleman could have died when the person was pregnant. And so there are some permutations.
Right. Well, you know, I think, you know, we might, I think I would like to have you back. We're just going to spend an entire program just looking on the subject of contesting a will. It sounds contentious when I put it like that, but I want to talk about it because we find that this is something that, I mean, just by listening to what you said a while ago, like about 4 or 5 different questions just in mind, and I want to ask you, but we're approaching going almost over the hour mark. So we're gonna pull up stumps here for now, and we're gonna arrange to have you back again, Stacy, because there's so many things I want to ask you that could potentially be very mix-up-ish, and it's very interesting to see. So, all right, people, thank you so much for tuning in, especially those of you who have your questions and your comments. Thank you so much for trying to find out how you administer your estate and so on. We didn't even really get to delve a lot into estate planning and so on, so that might have to be another program as well. But this was very interesting. It just goes to show just how many persons out there have real questions about how to handle the property that they acquire and make sure that those who they want to get it actually get it, even though some of them aren't interested in writing a will and putting pen to paper and stuff like that. So it's I would imagine it gets very hairy. It must get real confusing down there for you guys from time to time, right?
It's interesting. It's continuously interesting.
All right. All right, so we're going to talk off here, see if we can get another one going, because I don't think we're anywhere close to finishing this conversation. All right,
Thank you very much for inviting us, Vaughn. We appreciate it.
All right, well, that's it. It's time for us to wrap. It's time for us to wrap. Thank you to everyone who tuned into our discussion, especially those of you who sent in your questions and your comments. And if you have a question, you'd like to send it in, don't worry, send it in. Like I said, we're going to try and link up with Stacy again so we can have a further discussion on this topic so we can flesh out some more of the issues, right? And remember that our audience plays a major part in our show. So if there's anyone in particular you'd like us to have in studio, let us know. We'll try to have that person in studio as soon as possible. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram at Jamaica Information Service. And while I'm at it, you can check out the AGD's department. That's the Administrator General's Department. Remember, there's also the Accountant General's Department and the Attorney General's Department. So a whole heap of AGD's offices out there. Make sure you get this one right. We're talking to the Administrator General's Department. Google them, you'll find all the different information, website, socials, phone numbers, all that. We've also posted in the comments a link to their website and their phone number. So you can, if you have any questions, anything you want to find out or figure out, give them a call and they'll be able to help you understand how to get through the estate and so on. All right. So don't forget to follow us as well, Jamaica Information Service. We're the conduit often to help you see and get this information that you need to manage your life as a Jamaican citizen. We do this every week live on Facebook. I've been your host, Vaughn Davis, and this has been Studio 58A Live. Thank you very much for joining us, and please have a wonderful day. Thank you again, Stacy, and take care.